Wonderful. Thank you, Anne, for that great introduction. Now, it's about 12:06 on the East Coast, and that means it's time for me to get to my lunch.
Trevor, I don't think we get lunch today. We have this webinar to run.
Ooh, well, you're right. Now, there's many things I am willing to skip lunch for, but how about we push our lunch to 1:30, Scott?
That sounds good to me. But before that, why don't we introduce ourselves to the audience? My name's Scott. I'm the Digital Transformation Lead with the DHS Procurement Innovation Lab.
And I'm Trevor, the Testing and Sharing Lead within that same lab. We're also both innovation coaches. Now, Scott, why don't you tell everyone why we're here today?
Well, unlike our usual PIL webinars, we're not going to teach any innovative techniques today. Instead, we're going to discuss the broader innovation community. Several years ago, the PIL began sharing ideas with others to begin creating a new innovation community. Innovation isn't something you do once. It's not just one technique you can learn and apply. Innovation is a way of thinking about procurement, like Anne suggested at the top of the hour. The innovations that we apply today will hopefully not be the innovations of tomorrow, because there are going to be new ideas that come around. And the question is, will there be a community willing to accept those new ideas? So today we're going to talk about the progress we see in creating that culture and community of innovation.
The bulk of today's conversation will be the three contracting officers, each sharing a story where they implemented various innovative procurement techniques for the first time. Now, each discussion will be around 20 minutes, and we invite questions and interactivity throughout each individual conversation. And the final 10 minutes of today will be dedicated just to questions. So you can wait until the end, or you can put your question in the chat pod or the Q&A when you have it. We will have dedicated folks responding in real time, so fire away and put us to the test. Now, before we get into those stories, we do have a treat for you all. In the PIL, we start each webinar or bootcamp with what we call our tone from the top. We invite senior leaders in DHS or elsewhere to speak to our workforce for 5 minutes and really set the tone on a given topic. So our workforce hears it directly from senior leadership and not just from us, so that the boots on the ground are empowered to continue to innovate. Today's tone from the top is with Soraya and Leslie. Now, we'll have them for the next 10 minutes for a fireside chat. So we've provided the fireplace, so now I'm going to invite them on to fire away.
Great. Well, thank you, Anne, Trevor, and Scott for that very nice introduction. And thank you all so much for inviting me to speak to you at this joint Ncma and DHS PIL webinar. Today, we will discuss driving a culture of acquisition innovation, which is one of my favorite topics. The last few years have seen a strong shift and focus on innovation. In the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, innovation is really viewed as critical to our work of modernizing the federal acquisition system. And through the work of the Acquisition Innovation Advocates Council and strong collaboration with agencies like DHS, which has been at the forefront of this effort from day one, real progress is being made to ensure that our acquisition process is flexible, resilient, and ready to handle the changes that we know are constant. That's why I am so excited to be here today to provide the tone from the top with Soraya Correa, Chief Procurement Officer at the Department of Homeland Security, and a true champion and leader of procurement innovation, and to launch this first ever government-wide PIL webinar. Another first. Soraya.
Leslie, thank you very much. Thank you for that nice introduction, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. It's a real privilege to be here and share the stage with you, Leslie, and our guest speakers and our audience today. Leslie and I have been on this professional journey together for many years, and I consider her an esteemed colleague and also a true champion for our acquisition professionals, whether it's improving acquisitions or conducting innovative approaches. But I have to ask Leslie a quick question in this fireside chat. First, did you ever think we could look this good on screen? Huh? Do you like those pictures? Our staff just works very hard on making us look better all the time. But the real question I wanted to ask you was, back when I was appointed as the Chief Procurement Officer of DHS, what did you think when I came and said to you, hey, I'm thinking about standing up this thing called the Procurement Innovation Lab. What did you think about that idea?
Yeah, well, honestly, at that time, I didn't know what to think or how we would even do it. But I was so intrigued by the notion that we needed to start with changing the culture, not the rules or the laws, but the culture. And Soraya, you really had it right. It was exactly the right place to start. And really, there was no one better to take this on for our community. Our acquisition professionals needed to have that space to bring their ideas and creativity to change that culture. And they really needed a senior leader to step up and stand for their ability to do just that. And your focus on making the change one procurement at a time has also proven out to be the best incremental approach and just the steady approach that our community needed to make these changes become a way that we just do business normally. So lesson learned, right? Sometimes it's exactly these really forward-leading ideas that we need to test out.
Well, thank you. And you're right. And I want to reinforce this for our audience. We always need, us leaders have to be open to new ideas and new approaches. And the best ideas and approaches actually come from the boots on the ground, as Trevor likes to say, the folks who do the job day to day. And that was the concept behind the Procurement Innovation Lab, that we could put together all the meetings and all the groups and all the working groups and come up with a bunch of ways to do things. But the real innovation was going to come from the men and women who actually do the job every single day. And since we've launched the PIL, we've seen our acquisition workforce feel more empowered and more comfortable bringing ideas to bear on our procurement processes, whether that idea is about a single evaluation factor, an entire process, or the entire procurement. They're coming forward and we're seeing real results. The Office of Federal Procurement Policy has been one of the best champions and partners in this area of procurement innovation. They really have helped us shape this culture. And an important point that I always like to bring up is not everyone is going to feel comfortable trying to be innovative or creative. And we don't expect everyone to be. What we expect are those who feel comfortable taking these risks and coming forward to come forward and do that. And then we'll test these ideas and then we'll share what we've learned. And when we share what we've learned, we empower those who perhaps didn't want to be innovative to try that new idea. So why are we innovating? Well, we're not doing it just for the sake of innovating. I know that's the new buzzword in town and everybody likes to use it. We do this because our missions, the jobs that we perform, demand us to be better, to be more efficient, to be more effective. The missions that we serve, when I think of the Department of Homeland Security and protecting the homeland, that's a mission that requires us to be a little less risk averse and be a little bit more proactive about finding good solutions, solid solutions that meet all of our customer needs, especially that of the ultimate customer, which is the American taxpayer. Creative ideas help us to lower those barriers to competition, lower the barriers for companies to enter the federal government market, whether those are small companies, innovative companies, or non-traditional companies, companies who don't normally sell to the federal government. New ideas, as I mentioned before, encourage competition by providing interested vendors with a better understanding of what we're trying to achieve. And innovation increases the likelihood of successful outcomes on our procurements because we're evaluating offers in a new way that identifies the most innovative, creative, and potentially best solutions and vendors to support our needs. Over to you, Leslie.
Yeah, Soraya, thank you for that. The PIL really has been at the forefront of this important change from day one, but you've offered the PIL framework to others and have been supporting the larger federal acquisition community along your journey, which has been incredibly helpful. It's an open framework that's been adapted by other federal acquisition leaders within their own agencies and organizations. And it is really helping to change culture across the entire federal acquisition system. And I don't want this point to get lost. The true multiplier has been the PIL's focus on sharing stories, sharing information, doing exactly what we're here today to do. And this has ensured that the experiences of our acquisition teams are heard by their colleagues and provides a foundation to continuously build upon. And at OFPP, we constantly promote the sharing of stories, and you can go to the periodic table of acquisition innovation on fai.gov to see these examples arrayed by steps in the acquisition process. This storytelling is really invaluable, so thank you for making that a critical pillar.
Thank you, Leslie, and thank you for recognizing that. That was one of the key elements of our PIL framework. It was not only to test, but to share, and not just to share across the Department of Homeland Security, but across the federal government. All of us need to work together. When we collaborate, when we cooperate with one another, we bring better solutions. And at the end of the day, whether you're a DHS, Social Security, Interior, it doesn't matter. We're all here to serve the American public. And so I'm very excited about the work we've been doing. I was very pleased to co-author with Polly the article that Anne mentioned earlier that just recently appeared in the Ncma magazine. The article is entitled Influencing the Culture of Federal Acquisition, the Department of Homeland Security's Procurement Innovation Lab. We tell the story of the Procurement Innovation Lab and how far we've come. And I think that story is extremely important to share because I want others to feel comfortable exploring this journey, getting on this bandwagon, if you will, of innovation and promoting the culture of innovation. I did want to add one last thing. You mentioned the periodic table of innovation. That has been probably one of the best resources to make sure that we get information out there. It's a single place for people to go and hear our stories. We host our stories through webinars at DHS, but we also share those with other federal agencies. So again, it's a real privilege to have this opportunity to share this changing culture that we're adapting on a day-to-day basis. Over to you, Leslie.
Yeah, I think what's really been important to me is how we've been able to support the acquisition community as we've moved to a more virtual procurement process due to the pandemic. And I think the article really shares this momentum. And I've seen absolutely no evidence that our acquisition professionals are slowing down their innovation journey at all. And I think as we think about implementing new priorities and making our acquisition opportunities more available and more accessible, thanks to this virtualization, I think we will be better positioned to do just that.
Yeah, I agree. There's no signs that our acquisition community is slowing down. And in fact, I think they're picking up speed on the acquisition innovations. They continue to focus on coming up with new ideas and new approaches. And with your support, we continue, with your support and that of the Acquisition Innovation Advocates Council, I should mention, we're excited to continue our PIL bootcamp workshops and our new PIL coaching clinic. The coaching clinic is really a coach-to-coach model where we teach folks how to be innovation coaches for the procurement teams. And by teaching folks these tactics, the contracting officers who actually lead the procurement teams can actually coach their own teams into producing great innovations and making sure that we do things in the right way and we come up with good ideas and good approaches for acquisitions. In fact, according to feedback that we receive through our post-award interviews, at the end of each procurement, we actually go out and interview teams that have participated through the Procurement Innovation Lab on an innovation project. I can't talk today. And we receive great feedback. And two key things that they always raise: the support of the procurement innovation coach is essential. And the second thing they raise is the resources that we've collectively developed in that periodic table of acquisition innovation. They really like those two resources helping them out throughout the process. So we're seeing evidence of strong results, not just within DHS, but across the federal government and other agencies. In fact, today you're going to hear from 3 contracting specialists or contracting officers who have been kind enough to take the time out of their busy day to share their innovation journey with us.
Yeah, that's great. And as you listen to these teams, please think about the risks that they took to innovate. It's perceived to be safer to do our work the way we've always done it. If nothing else, it's more comfortable. But bringing the ideas and creativity to reconsider our work and to view our work through a different lens is really critical. And we want to ensure that our acquisition system stays relevant and is able to support the mission environments that are consistently changing in the face of new citizen needs or new adversaries. So by managing the risk, recognizing the risk in the way we currently do business and taking smart risks to improve the way we do business, we can continue our modernization efforts. And as we do that, we'll increasingly realize the true benefits of innovation: faster procurements, better procurements, the kind of procurements our customers and taxpayers deserve and demand.
I agree with you, Leslie. And now I want to take a quick opportunity to thank everyone for joining us and attending this first Government and Industry PIL webinar. I also want to take a moment to thank our partners at Ncma for all they do for our contracting community, and especially for partnering with us to provide today's event, which allows us to share with folks what we're doing in the procurement culture, how we're changing the procurement culture. And finally, and most importantly, I do have to thank Emily, David, and Chance, our 3 contracting professionals from U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, Interior Business Center, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which is part of DHS, for sharing their stories with us today. And I would be remiss if I didn't say a special thank you to my team in the Procurement Innovation Lab. We started this journey in 2015. Look how far we've come. And I know we have so much further to go, but I'm very proud and honored to be their Chief Procurement Officer and to be with all of you today. Thank you. And Trevor and Scott, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Soraya and Leslie. It's always a pleasure to have these 2 great leaders from within government. Really appreciate your time with us today, so thank you very much. Well, Trevor, I think it's about time we hear from our teams and what they're doing on the front lines, as the foot soldiers, as you say, to use the innovative techniques to change that procurement culture. I understand our first story comes to us from the Department of Interior, but I'm not sure how to pronounce this acronym.
Well, maybe I can have David come on and tell us a little bit about, let me take a stab at it. Is it Bessie? Is that right?
Bessie, you got it. That's right, Trevor.
All right. Well, can you tell us a little bit about what Bessie does and then maybe what you were buying for this specific procurement?
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you for having me. Again, my name is David Jablonski. So Bessie is the Bureau of Safety Environmental Enforcement. So it's a lead federal agency charged with improving safety, ensuring environmental protection to the offshore energy industry. So really what they're doing is they're setting the regulatory oversight and enforcement, of oil, natural gas, and now it's a hot topic, renewable energy. So that's what Bessie is in charge of. So this requirement that we're going to be going over today is the Enterprise Information Technology Core Service Contract, EITCS. This is a mix of help desk support services, on-site hardware and software desk side support, mobile device support, cybersecurity services, network administrative services, and web application development and support. So really a wide array of our critical IT infrastructure services that are needed to support the agency. So this requirement was done not only for Bessie, but also our sister agency, BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, also the Office of Natural Resource Revenue, Honor, and it was for locations not only in the DC area, but Gulf of Mexico region, Denver, California, Alaska, so all across the country that we're needing the support services provided to our departments. So this requirement was a FAR 8.4 requirement, so GSA schedule requirement, base period and 5 option periods with an estimated value between $75 and $80 million. So we did this as a firm fixed price with performance-based incentives and also reimbursable travel. And this is done as a GSA solicitation, Schedule 70 vendors, where we issued it directly to 18 contractors that we identified through the market research phase of the acquisition.
All right. Now, it's always vitally important to understand what we're buying because that informs how we buy it. So for this specific procurement, what made you think about infusing these new innovative procurement techniques here?
Yeah, so coming into the last option period of the contract, this is back in 2019, so before the pandemic. I was looking at what did we do previously since I was not the contracting officer involved with procurement at that time. How was it competed? What were the results that we had? And then also talking with the core program office to find out, okay, well, what pain points did you have in the previous procurement? And then, maybe what we could do to overcome them. So around that time as well, I know a couple of our staff members, they had attained or gone to a PIL boot camp out at one of our DOI offices. And then I also had the chance to go to the 2019 Ncma Government Contract Management Symposium, where I got to also hear a PIL boot camp, a mini boot camp session essentially, where I learned more about the different techniques that are being used and within DHS and other organizations.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting you bring that up because the 2019 GCMS, we actually did something very similar to this today, but it was in a live studio audience back when we could do that. And it's such a cool story of sharing that way. And now you're back this way, absorbing it, trying it, and now you're here to share your experiences. And that's our testing and sharing model. So I love how that came together over the next couple of years. Now, why did you use those specific techniques for this procurement?
Yeah, so we're talking with Paul, our core, and just going over some of his pain points. Some of the things that he had discussed and said was that, after the procurement was done, basically it came down to him, doing most of the evaluation. And that's something that it took a while, looking at the time it took from the solicitation closing to the actual finishing the evaluations, it was approximately 3 months for them to finish all the evaluations, come to their final consensus. So it took a while. And when talking with the core, he mentioned that a lot of it fell on him. And he had to go through quotes that were 150, 200 pages long, and to comb through all that information to make sure we had everything down needed to justify who we're awarding to. And so, yes, whatever we can do potentially to reduce that would be a big help for that.
Yeah, I hear you. I wouldn't want to do that myself. So tell us about the innovations you used here. I understand it was a full suite. And then which techniques were newest to you and your organization?
Yes, so as you guys can see here on the slide, so we had a multi-phase approach. We had an advisory down select in the middle of our requirement, confidence ratings, oral presentations, and on the spot consensus. So all of these were actually new to me. I had never done any of them before. And so within my organization, we have had people that completed oral presentations, although different variations. Here we used an interactive approach to our oral presentations where we had kind of a Q&A session during it. And also we provided them questions ahead of time and on the spot for them to answer the day of. So just a little variation of what has traditionally was done sometimes of a more formal read through of a proposal or quote, rather than just having more of a dialogue allowed within the oral presentation itself.
Excellent. Now, before you walk us through your evaluation model, can you tell us kind of what you did last time, maybe the approach or how long it took?
Yeah, so on our previous requirement and looking through how we had done the requirement, it was 4 evaluation factors and 12 sub-factors under the evaluation. So our factor A from the previous one was a technical capability / approach. We had 5 sub-factors underneath that. Our second factor was qualifications of key personnel. Our third one was a management approach. We used a PMP and transition plan with that. Again, that's another 5 sub-factors. And then our last one was a past performance, / past experience. We had 2 sub-factors, one for past approach, one for past experience up there.
Outstanding.
And for the new model here, so we went ahead, obviously you could tell we definitely revamped it a bit. So everything before was done written. So we had everything was written, technical capability, management approach. And here we replaced a lot of that with our oral presentations. So this time around, based on the pain points that we discussed earlier, we went ahead and did 2 phases. So to get from to be able to potentially reduce the amount of people in the second phase that we're doing the more the longer evaluation process for. So we had our first factor or first phase where we had a 6-page demonstrated prior experience, a light lift for contractors to want to get them to participate, but also it's meaningful for us. This is a big demonstration. So we gave the contractors, and within the RFQ itself, 3 questions / scenarios that we wanted them to respond to for our team to evaluate. So we did the evaluation after we got the responses back, and then we determined, okay, well, who's the most highly successful of these contractors, or who's probably the not as highly successful or least successful based on what was provided. So we ranked them, did our evaluation for the first phase, and then we sent advisory letters out to all the contractors that participated, either advising them to proceed to the second round or advising them to opt out. So ultimately, the 2 that we advised to opt out, they ended up opting out of the second round. So then that means we had 4 left in our second round to evaluate from. Now, within the advisory letters, we also included a date essentially for a discovery session in the second round. We also included a common cutoff for our written materials that we had performance work statement, slide deck for the oral presentations, and also their performance incentives and pricing too. We had that all before the oral presentations. We had also a date and time for the oral presentation set, and we also included, was it 2 scenarios questions as advanced questions for the oral presentation for them to incorporate in their slides. So that's how we went into the second phase. So the second phase, we had our written materials, our PWS, that was provided back, performance incentives, quality control plan, and price for the oral presentation. And the day of the oral presentation, we provided on-the-spot questions, 3 questions, scenarios to them, where they had an hour essentially to prep to incorporate them into their solicitation. That's where they discussed their technical capability, their management approach. So those were all discussed via the oral presentations. And then we had the ability to ask questions after they gave their presentation. Then after that, we actually came to a consensus on the contractor.
Outstanding. And we did have one question related to that. Someone asked, were the Q&As pre-defined and shared with vendors ahead of time, or you just shared them the day of the presentation?
Yeah, so we defined everything in advance. So for the questions, we had it set to which ones are going to be given advanced questions and which ones we're going to be doing on the spot. And we gave the advanced ones with the advisory down select notice. And then we gave the on the spot questions the day of, the same 3 questions to each contractor. So we're getting the feedback on the same thing, evaluating the same thing essentially to standardize for each of the contractors.
All right. And some folks noticed you didn't include past performance as an evaluation factor. Could you just briefly tell us what considerations went into making that decision?
Yeah, so we were looking at what is going to be a discriminating factor and what's going to be really important to us. And we determined, since at the beginning of the competition, or just the market research phase, we identified contractors that had done this type of work before. We already knew that they all had past performance of some kind that would be advantageous to us. So we kind of did the legwork at the beginning, and that really determined that it wasn't going to be a factor that would set any one contractor apart from the other. The prior experience was going to be more important to us rather than just past performance itself.
Outstanding. Now, I think we might have to speed up just a little bit to get through the rest of what we wanted to talk about today, David. So let's keep that in mind. So we'll shift next, a more culture-related question. How was this approach perceived at your agency?
Overall, it was great. I think internally, we had my managers and my team, that they were very excited that I was willing to try something. Even my senior procurement executive, we had to give a presentation to her prior to going out because it was over our dollar thresholds. And she was very excited and interested to see how this would turn out at the end.
Awesome. So different from your agency and your SPE support, was everybody on your team comfortable with the new approach?
I think the core on this project, I know he just wanted to make sure that he was getting back the information he needed in order to evaluate the contractors. So he preferred that we had everything in writing, but I think it took a little bit of discussion with him to realize that he didn't need to have all of the technical approach and management approach in writing. We could get the same level of feedback through the oral presentations and not have to have all that writing to read through. And then internally, from my team, I think one of the things that was most, I guess, uncomfortable was that the select best suited, then negotiate. I think that was one where I really had to kind of work through and make sure that we're using it appropriately, so we don't run the risk of a protest at the end of the solicitation when we made the award.
Right. I understand you you worked with your legal counsel. Your legal counsel was comfortable with it being put in the solicitation. So since it was in the solicitation, did you end up using any of that language during execution?
Yes, we did. So when we were getting ready to make the award decision, the contractor that we had basically selected for the best suited, best value, we determined that there were a couple things that were missing from the performance work statement, but they talked about it in the oral presentation. So my program office really wanted to make sure it's included in the PWS because when we're awarding it, we're including that with the award itself. We're attaching it to the Word document. So we went back to them and requested that that be added to their performance work statement, those comments, which they did. And so that kind of solidified things on our end.
Saying now, our IPTs we develop on our teams, CO, program office, the attorney. Can you just briefly touch on your attorney support from the beginning?
Yeah, so the attorney on this requirement, her name is Cheryl Rakestraw, and she was a wealth of information. So she came back to Department of Interior. She was actually with DHS and supporting the PIL, from what I understand. And so she had been through these different procurements when she was back at DHS. So she's able to share that information and insights with me, how things work, give me great legal advice along the way to make sure we were kind of staying in bounds and doing everything correctly, and just kind of explaining the process, as this is my first time going through it as well.
Yeah, shout out to Cheryl. Her and I had actually worked together, and it was just serendipitous. She ended up being your support. It was so funny. Now, a big part of the reason we talk about culture, we talk about the agencies and how they support. You've already kind of mentioned that your SPE was supportive. Was there anything else, maybe the prior culture at BSEE or DOI?
So within our agency, so we had not actually done any, outside of the oral presentations, which I spoke about, we had not done a lot of innovation within the procurement bureau itself within BSEE. But our managers are absolutely amazing and always there to support us. So I started early in the process. When we exercised the last option year, I brought the idea to my manager, my team lead, and we talked about this. So we're really making sure we have the program office included, legal included, and that everyone was included in the process. They understood what was going on, could ask questions, and we were all on the same page. So it was very much supportive, and I think there were a lot of questions, and so I took a lot of time to explain what we were doing to make sure everyone understood the different techniques being used, and that there is case studies behind them as well, so that we could actually have that and share that discussion with people, so everyone felt comfortable with the process.
Right, and briefly, we're sharing your story right now today, but what have you done to share this story across BSEE or Department of Interior so far?
Yeah, so after we awarded this requirement, the senior procurement executive, Megan Olson, she asked our division chief if I'd be willing to share this project across Department of Interior. So just a couple months ago in January, I was able to share this procurement, go through the details on every single different procurement innovative technique used across the entire Department of Interior through an all hands meeting. So I went in detail about each procurement technique, shared links, shared information, shared my solicitation documents provided to me as well, just so we can share that out externally. Even internally in BSEE, I know our program office had been talking about it with other program offices, and so that was getting a conversation going internally as well within the program offices. So definitely a lot of sharing within the organization, which has been great.
Yeah, and so can you share maybe really briefly with us one of those examples where someone reached out to you about your experience?
Yeah, so it was nice. Someone from one of the other DOI bureaus reached out saying he was working on a procurement IT contract similar to this one, but it was a FAR 15 IDIQ, and not that much time to actually get to an award. And so he's working on getting the solicitation out. And after hearing the presentation, just wanted to kind of go through different techniques, such as the multi-phase procurement in a FAR 15 environment. Then also talking about using an advisory down select in there and streamlining it, going over to the oral presentations potentially rather than using the written technical approach that he was going to include in his solicitation. So we talked about all those and kind of give him encouragement and information, links, the PIL primer videos, and also the periodic innovation table of acquisition from FAI, giving him all that information, different resources, so he can try to use those and incorporate them into his procurement.
Outstanding. We did have a question earlier, and I'm trying to think about what it said, but it was about, are some of these just really more common sense approaches when you think about our business world and the government? And to that, I say absolutely. However, for the majority of our federal government, especially on the civilian side, how and when to apply techniques like this to gain a lot of value are not yet common sense. I would hope one day they do become common sense in the business world. And that's part of why we're here today, because we know there's an appetite to hear about experiences like this, and they might be helpful to others out there. Now, before we get to the next slide, I just wanted to briefly touch on some feedback you got from one of the vendors during your brief explanation process. And they sent back that, the feedback you provided them with was very useful. And what David did here was he just cut out some direct statements from his evaluation report about their increase and decreased confidence and sent it directly to the VP of capture at the company. So you can see his complimentary approach of David. I'm not here to toot David's horn too much, but he was very appreciative of his transparency and open communication. And I was as well. So he went a little bit outside of his comfort zone and gave them just parts of the evaluation report. So kudos to David. Now we'll go on to the next slide. And I was able to secure a minute or two from Scott, David, so we can wrap up here. But
Okay.
Just briefly take us through any of these noted differences that stood out most to you.
Yeah, so the biggest thing is we really sped up the procurement evaluation process. So when we got to the end, it was more efficient. We were done on the last day of our oral presentations, evaluating each of the contractors, and came to our final consensus on the last day as well. We really cut out a lot of the reading that the program office had to do. 3 months last time to get to their final consensus, and we were able to do it on the last day. So that was huge, and the program office liked it as well. The interaction between the government and contractor was also a big improvement here over the previous requirement. So they, at the end of each session, they were able to come out and say, look, this person knows what they're talking about, or they don't. And we don't get that all the time by reading a paper, quote, or proposal from somebody. But you can get that when you're having this kind of dialogue with the oral presentations itself. Working closely with the procurement office from the beginning, the program office and the legal management as well, I think it really cut down a lot of the questions and a lot of the concerns because we started so early and everyone was within the communication from the beginning.
All right, and that'll bring us right to our last slide. Why don't you share a couple of your lessons learned specifically, and maybe those will resonate to some of the folks in the audience. Yeah,
so from this procurement, I think one thing I would have done a little bit clearer is make sure that trade-off was the primary basis for evaluation. I think it was a little unclear in my solicitation, but obviously that was the intention of it, and we did, it just wasn't as clear as I wish it was. Going from the first phase to the second phase, I would have advised 3 to proceed rather than the 4 that we did. That was something we're kind of on the fence with during the procurement itself, but we decided to bring 4 rather than 3, and it determined at the end of the day that after the oral presentation was done, that really 3 probably would have been fine. The 4th one probably wasn't as strong as we thought. And the other one was posting to eBuy potentially over just a direct solicitation of 18 contractors. I think having that quick phase 1 approach made things a lot faster than we thought it would have been. And bringing in more companies, obviously, that have potential to do it, or notifying more, could have potentially changed the results. So that's something I probably would look for. And the biggest thing is looking at the procurement itself and determining if the techniques can be used, and also working with the team early. Those are the biggest takeaways I have from this.
All right, outstanding. And we're trying to be mindful of time. We've already stolen 4 minutes from Scott and Emily, but they're really good partners, and so I know that they're okay. David, thank you. Hope you stick around and entertain some questions when we're done. But if not, we'll turn our cameras off and bring Scott and Emily up.
Have a great day, guys.
Great story, David. Thanks so much for sharing with us. Next up, I'd like to welcome Emily Gorelski from the Department of Commerce's U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Emily is a contracting officer with the Trademark and Corporate Services Division, Office of Procurement. And last year, she awarded about a $3 million cloud-based agile project using just a host of innovative techniques. And she did it all in just 43 days. 43. And today, she's going to tell us about how she did it. So Emily, welcome to the webinar.
Wonderful. And Scott, thanks so much for having me today. I'm honored to be speaking with our audience and to share a little bit more about what we're going to refer to today as PEDS. It's the Patent Examination Data System. So PEDS and the Amazon cloud provides public users the ability to securely search, view, and download large sets of data for all publicly available patent applications. The PEDS initiative enhances these capabilities and advances automation while bringing value to the USPTO. It brings value to stakeholders through lean, innovative, efficient, effective, and agile techniques. PEDS was awarded in August of 2020 under FAR 8.4, and as Scott mentioned, it was a $2.8 million labor hour BPA task order. PEDS was awarded off of USPTO's Intelligent Automation Innovation Support Services multiple awards schedule BPA, which has 13 BPA holders in just 43 days after the solicitation was released. A few interesting facts about PEDS. PEDS was the first BPA task order awarded off of the IAISS BPA. It required an innovative solution to reduce PALT, and it required the government team to work as an integrated product team to design an innovative strategy that utilized a variety of advanced innovation techniques that we'll be sharing with you today.
And I understand that you worked with our very own Sandra Oliver Schmidt, one of our excellent PIL coaches, and she was sort of an informal advisor as the USPTO used these advanced techniques. Why don't you tell us about the innovations you used here and what that process was like?
Oh, and that's a wonderful segment into the project, and just major kudos to Sandra. Sandra was a wonderful asset to our team, providing us with numerous resources. Our team was able to hit the ground running. So how did PEDS come to fruition? On the screen, you'll see a brief overview of it, and that's what I'm going to do is just walk through our process. PEDS utilized a multi-phase advisory soft voluntary down select with various advanced innovative techniques. For our phase one, factor one, we had the factor as experience. 4 experience questions were listed within our RFQ. The RFQ was sent to all 13 BPA holders, and 9 quotes were received in writing. Our team performed an immediate on-the-spot consensus using confidence ratings and streamlined documentation, which led us into our next step, which was advisory letters. We were able to issue these advisory letters just 2 days after concluding those evaluations. We issued 9 advisory letters. 4 quoters from phase one were advised to proceed, and 5 were advised not to proceed. However, they may proceed if they choose to. All 4 quoters took the government's advice to proceed, and 5 quoters that were advised not to proceed took the government's advice not to proceed. So here we are in phase 2. Phase 2 consisted of 2 factors. Our factor 1 was technical, and factor 3 is price. For factor 2, we had 4 technical questions that were provided up front within our RFQ, and each phase 2 quoter presented responses to these questions virtually during our oral presentations, in which each quoter had an allotted presentation time. We also utilized interactive dialogue so that we could ask clarifying questions on exactly what was presented. At the conclusion of our phase 2, the team utilized the same evaluation technique that I briefly mentioned for phase 1. And for our factor 3, we had price matrices that were received in writing and evaluated. Our team performed a trade-off. We also utilized the select best suited then negotiate approach, in which virtual exchanges were conducted with the best suited quoter to make the performance work statement, quality assurance surveillance plan, and price even better. Negotiations were successful, and as previously mentioned, this whole process took only 43 days. After award, we offered brief explanations to all quoters.
And I want to roll back for a second and ask a follow-up question about that QOSP and PWS you mentioned. Was it a surprise to the best suited vendor when you asked to negotiate that, or did you state it up front in the solicitation?
And that it's a great question that I'm very glad you asked. We were extremely transparent within our RFQ. The government listed within our RFQ that we reserved the right to go out to the firm that we felt was the best suited after we performed our trade-off to negotiate on those final documents, the performance work statement, QOSP, and any remaining issues. So that is what we did. We went out to who the best suited offer was after we performed the trade-off. However, we had language within our RFQ provided up front that stated If we were unable to successfully address any remaining issues, the government reserves the right to engage with the next best suited to go through the exact same issues. In our case, we went out to the select best suited to negotiate, and we actually had 2 rounds of negotiations, and we were very successful in negotiating the final cost, PWS, and price.
That's fantastic. There's so many great innovations here that you all used, and you've got some of my favorites, like corporate experience, which allows you to focus in on certain questions instead of asking big ones like describe your technical approach, and the oral presentations, which use the show me, don't tell me approach. And all of these help to speed up the procurement, right? 43 days, that proves speeding up procurement. They make it easier for the evaluators to actually evaluate them, and hopefully they're lowering cost for the quoters to submit their quote as well. Now, after award, I know that the Department of Commerce's Acquisition Innovation Advocate, Elliot Jones, performed some of those post-award interviews that Leslie and Soraya were talking about earlier for you. Can you tell us what these interview results were like?
Absolutely. So I'll just start. Elliot's role as the Commerce AIA helps to promote and support innovation and collaboration amongst our acquisition culture in an effort to improve outcomes and reduce halt. So these post-award interview feedback that we receive from both government and industry, it's invaluable. Communications are how we learn, grow, and improve. Both government and industry, they were asked a variety of questions pertaining to pre-solicitation communications, the RFQ process, and overall feedback. So on the screen right now, we have some of the feedback from the government team, and that's where I'll start. Our government team, they valued the multi-phase approach, and they found phase 1 to be very effective as real-world experiences from industry were vital to the success of the project. I mentioned virtual oral presentations. They were asked about virtual oral presentations and found that it provided an opportunity to ask clarifying questions on exactly what was presented. The government team found the select best suited then negotiate process to be streamlined, as they were only evaluating 1 performance work statement and quality assurance surveillance plan in the negotiation phase. The team valued the use of confidence ratings. They commented that these drove straight to the point. And the team also valued advisory letters. They found that this was the most powerful tool used, and a close second was on-the-spot consensus. Overall, our team was extremely satisfied with this process and the reduced evaluation time.
This is really powerful support that, the innovation community that we're building is supportive of these ideas. I want to highlight the one that really speaks to me. It says, the source selection was one of the most efficient during my time at USPTO. I mean, that speaks just amazingly to the innovations that Emily's applying. And it's followed closely by this other one, which I think just speaks to how much time the evaluators got back. Using the multi-phased approach, the program office was not inundated with too much information at one time. Just amazing. All right, we've got a poll pop up. We just had the government one. We're coming up to the industry one. So take a look to answer those questions, and we'll move on to the next slide as we talk here. So Emily, what did industry have to say about the techniques you used? We know government liked it. What did industry say?
So industry found the multi-phased approach to be very effective as well. For phase 1, industry commented that 10 pages for their responses was sufficient and effective for the size and scope of the solicitation. The advisory down select allowed for milestones to be met. The select best suited then negotiate was also effective because it reduced level of effort up front, and this approach saved a significant amount of time. Since government was asked about confidence ratings, industry was asked this as well, and they too found this to be a very effective technique. Overall, industry was pleased with the down select process, communications, and to see that innovation is taking place.
And I don't want to speak on behalf of industry today, but there is this notion among government that industry is fearful or doesn't like the advisory down select, and the feedback that you got and the ones that we get when we do our post-award interviews, it just demonstrates that our industry partners really do appreciate the advisory down select. And you can see that in the quote here. Since we did not participate in phase 2, this was a very easy lift for us. And that means they were able to save money, which they could then apply to a procurement where they have a stronger chance of winning. And I hope that all of our industry partners can appreciate that. And all of the comments from industry and government, they really hit home that dual nature of the innovative techniques that we're building. And, you know, like Anne said at the start, she's been a champion of innovation for a long time. And we have to build that community as a government industry community and an industry innovation community. And the innovations might make it a little easier for government to evaluate and help us to procure a better product, but they also reduce that cost for quoters and improve access when they're submitting quotes. So I think all of the feedback really demonstrates that the innovations are working and they're benefiting both parties. Emily, after you reviewed all the feedback, what are the impacts you're having on the Department of Commerce's acquisition culture?
And I think this is a really crucial thing to realize, because we can implement a process, but then we want to follow it through to see the impact it's having and how attainable it is to implement across an agency. So I can definitely speak to the impact on DOC culture. Within my own agency at the USPTO, there's been numerous contracting officers, division chiefs, and customers that have reached out to my team. We provided numerous briefings and overviews, provided our samplets and templates about this process, and we are seeing this process being used and implemented successfully. Our colleagues are able to take this process and easily implement it, especially with the advisory letters. It's being widely used, and I just can't speak to the success enough of it. Interestingly enough, we've also been invited, we were invited to the Census Bureau to give a briefing on the PEDS presentation. So we've been able to transfer knowledge and share some lessons learned with that group as well, who's interested in continuing to utilize these processes. I've spoken to folks over at NOAA who are interested in the confidence ratings and learning more about what's going on. The Department of Commerce Acquisition Council also was very interested in these post-award feedback. So the impact is far-reaching. People like it based off of the feedback. They're finding it effective, and we are seeing tremendous success with implementation.
Yeah, and that cross collaboration that you're having between, you know, USPTO and NOAA and Census, or, you know, between DHS and USPTO, that's what's helping to build that innovation community. And then you add on, you know, sessions like this with Ncma and industry, and, you know, we've got the community. And that's what's going to help us to prepare, not just for continuing to apply the innovations that you talked about today, but how to apply the innovations of the future, the next gen innovations, right? I think we've got some questions coming in. Trevor, is there one that I should highlight maybe before we get to lessons learned?
We're saving a couple for the end, but
Okay.
maybe a question that came in related to the VISI procurement was, your procurement took 43 days. What would be the timetable without the innovations?
So PALT for an action like this within our agency, if it's under $5 million, would run somewhere around 60 days plus. Once we hit that $5 million threshold, we're 90 days plus. So we were able to cut off several weeks just and hit the ground running utilizing these processes. And especially, I want to point out one more thing, Trevor. As far as the evaluation team, it wasn't up on the slides here, but the evaluation team found doing this on-the-spot consensus with confidence ratings saved substantial time, and I believe they were able to get through 9 phase 1 proposals in under 5.5 hours.
That's amazing. Well, Emily, do you have any final lessons learned for us you'd like to share with the audience today?
Absolutely, Scott. I have 3 brief lessons learned that I thought and collaborated on. So I'll go through them real quickly. One, just providing more instructions about how the optional non-evaluated documents will be treated. Consider not using them in future procurements since they seem to be a burden on vendors. Quick example here, within the PED solicitation, we had asked for a 1-pager of bulletized list of points to be made during the presentation, but we stated up front in our RFQ that this would not be evaluated. We've learned that it was just not a necessary document, and in the future, when I coach and speak to teams, I advise, you know, not to ask for things in writing that may not be helpful to be evaluated. Moving on to the next one, just providing more details in the solicitation if experience as a prime is weighted heavier than as a subcontractor. This came out of industry in our post-award interviews. We did not have a preference in here, but just simply stating it within the solicitation is just helpful. More information in this case would have been valuable and helpful. And last but not least, my favorite, and I know, Scott, we've talked about this one some, having evaluators turn on their camera to make it more like an in-person oral presentation. Since ours was kind of the guinea pig out the door at USPTO in the virtual environment with this, we did not have the government team with cameras on. We received feedback that industry would have valued that the nonverbal cues and just realizing that someone's on the other end, just as we're doing today, Scott, being able to have that eye contact. So that's a big lesson learned. And in the future, we've asked, contracting officers using this technique to either have the CO with the camera on or some of the technical folk members just to make it more of an in-person presentation.
And it's just another illustration of the power of the innovation community that we're building, because the lessons learned that Emily just spoke about, that she learned from USPTO, are being implemented and applied right now across the acquisition community. I'm coaching teams about the impact of having cameras on, thanks to Emily's procurement. And now you all can share those lessons learned too, because you're part of the innovation community. Well, Emily, I want to thank you a whole lot for the time today. I really appreciate it. And I know that our audience does too.
It was my pleasure, Scott, and I'm happy to stick around for any questions that come through. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. I'm going to kick it back over to Trevor and see what's up next.
Well, what's up next is Chance. So Chance, come on here.
How's it going, sir?
There you go. Look good. Is that a FEMA shirt you're wearing?
Yes, sir.
Looks great. I can almost see the logo right there. Our FEMA folks are always mission connected. Well, hey, Chance, introduce yourself to the audience and let us know a little bit about your mission within FEMA, and maybe the FEMA specifically, and what you were doing for this procurement.
Sounds great. Well, first, thanks for having me today. And once again, my name is Chance Keone. Right now, I'm currently the contracting officer in the mitigation section within FEMA. I've currently been with FEMA about 11 years, but I've been in contracting for almost 15. For this procurement, my contract specialist, Amanda Heller, and I were tasked with establishing a 5-year single award BPA. It was our job to procure communication support services for the actual National Flood Insurance Program. These services are actually necessary to reduce the nation's insurance gap so disaster survivors are more financially prepared to recover from a disaster and build a culture of preparedness. And in addition to that, just want to let everybody know that Amanda Heller is actually on this call as well. And if anyone has any questions during this session, they can reach out to her via the chat, and hopefully she can answer some of those questions for you.
Awesome. Shout out to Amanda as well. We'll throw her a bunch of shout outs. We know she did all the work, right? No,
exactly. I mean, an officer is only as good as their specialist. So she made us very successful on this, and also for our other PIL procurement that we worked on.
Yeah, it's interesting. As we align these stories to come into this conversation, it didn't strike me until a couple of days ago that all three were, GSA scheduled task orders or BPA. So they're all within 8.405. But each one was different. The first one was 60 million, 3 million. Now this one, $112 million. And so maybe you and Emily can battle for the speediest title, but you got her by about 30 times multiplier on the price. So you guys can scrap that out later. But for this specific procurement, what made you think about infusing innovation in this model?
Well, unfortunately, I can't take any credit for that. I actually was in a different section within FEMA, and then I actually got a promotion during the whole COVID event and was actually put onto this requirement after the fact. So, the IPTs have already been happening. People are already meeting and talking. The PIL biweekly calls are already established. So essentially, I have to give a shout out to the FEMA Innovation Advocate team. You got Ryan Murray, Denise Morales, Spencer Sams. They were really the ones that drove the PIL initiative to make this happen. So once they reached out to the FIT office and described the whole PIL initiative, and they also were able to present them with an example of another NFIP project, which was NFIP Pivot. So they were able to actually present them with the two-phased approach and what kind of different techniques they used on the Pivot project. and they were able to show them how successful the PIL techniques really are. So once they reached out to program saw how great this was and jumped on board right away.
So different from our other two stories, you were the new guy on the team. So how did
Yes,
you
sir.
feel about being put into a situation you didn't really sign up for?
Unfortunately, my contract specialist and I were significantly worried about the learning curve. We thought that we might actually fail. Coming over to a new section, we both were going to be new to the mitigation section. So obviously being new guy on town to the section, but also new guy to the town on the actual PIL techniques, we thought that we were going to be set up for failure right away. However, we never actually attended any of the PIL boot camps either. So we just had a lot of doom and gloom and that we weren't going to be successful.
No. And that thought might resonate with some people here today. The doom and gloom, can I do it? Will I be successful? But how quickly and how were you able to feel more comfortable about the approach?
Well, with the FEMA advocate team, they had let me know that this was successful on the NFIP pivot project. So I took the initiative to actually reach out to the contract specialist that was involved with the pivot project. So I reached out to Neil Nyack, who was very successful in getting this done. So he was actually gracious enough to provide me with a copy of the PIL bootcamp workbook that they were provided for that training. So Amanda and I took the time to actually sit down and look at the workbook. And luckily, it's laid out in such layman terms and just very easy to read. So we became very comfortable with the techniques right away just from reading over the workbook. Before the workbook and everything and talking to the FEMA advocate team, we had never even heard about the PIL before. So it was all new to us.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting perspective. Even though this is the one story that's within DHS, where the PIL's been for 6 years, and we've had over a dozen FEMA projects, the mitigation branch, and you guys still hadn't heard about us, and it really just shows how much more work we all have to do.
Well, and like I said, I'm not necessarily maybe, I feel you guys do have a good foothold now. Like, now that I've had this experience and actually talked to the right people, talking to the FEMA advocates and, all the portfolio managers and just other people that have done it, like Neil Nyack, apparently the PIL process is more prevalent than I actually thought. It's just, I just wasn't in the know at the time.
All right. Now, why specifically did you all decide to use those techniques?
As I spoke briefly, I wasn't involved from the beginning, so I really feel, our portfolio manager for the actual mitigation section is Spencer Sams, and his supervisor Ryan Murray. They're part of the FEMA AIA team, so I really feel like they got involved from the very beginning, and they sat down with the program office and just kind of talked it through with them to see what kind of approach they wanted to actually do their evaluation strategy, and just kind of discuss the artifacts they wanted to see in each of the 2 phases. That way they could justify to see which company could actually do the work and be successful.
Right. So go ahead.
Oh, no, it's just so essentially, once Spencer laid out the plan, and during those bi-weekly PIL calls, we and Amanda and I had seen the strategy. So, we got on board right away.
Right. So with the innovations you used here, I understand that they were all new to you. So maybe which technique were you the most excited about to try?
I definitely was excited about the advisory down select. At the end of the day, you don't want to have too many proposals to evaluate. So we were very excited for the advisory down select. That way we could try to wean out some of the competition early on, so we didn't have to, do a full trade-off analysis on a lot of different companies.
All right. So before you, it's often it's my favorite technique to teach as well, and I see the most value in it for both sides. It's a really symbiotic approach. Before you walk us through your evaluation model, can you share maybe just generally, how long do things like this previously take for mitigation?
Unfortunately, I wasn't involved with the last BPA because we had just moved over to the mitigation section. But based on the information I was able to gather, it looks like the last BPA was roughly only valued at $40 million. And it actually took about 3 times as long to procure than it did for Amanda and I.
Yeah, I mean, 52, that's impressive timeline. So we're going to walk through that. So now, could you take a little bit and let's walk through this evaluation model so the folks could really understand what went on here.
Sure. So, as I touched briefly, we kind of did the multi-phased approach. So for phase one, our most important factor was really going to be that marketing technical approach. And what we did is we actually asked them to submit a 10-page written plan on their approach. We had them gel up based on scenario. We had them gel up 3 social media posts. So it could be an Instagram post, a Twitter post, or a Facebook post on how they plan to reach out to the actual public. We also had them present a 30-second radio script, and then also an official 1-page press release, all based on the scenario. And then also there was a second factor in phase one, which was a demonstrated prior experience. And this was all done via a 5-minute YouTube video. So our approach to this, we wanted to make sure that we stuck our grounds to the streamlined documentation. We want to make sure that, we only had one final document rather than each panel member doing an individual document. So our approach was to send all of the written documents to each panel member prior to actually sitting down and doing our consensus meeting. So instead of them actually doing the actual write-up and analyzing all the different aspects of factor one, we just had them take notes. And these notes weren't collected. It was just for them to speak to when we actually met, after everything was submitted. So then...
So you're telling me after the video, you stayed together and you evaluated that factor and then the written factor right after that?
Correct. So when we met for our consensus meeting, we got right into the YouTube video first. We actually did it in reverse. We got to factor 2 before factor 1 because we didn't want anyone's bias, negating the actual video. We didn't want somebody saying like company A, wasn't that great. So let's talk, and then it would actually taint one of the videos. So we watched the videos first without anybody speaking, did our on-the-spot consensus for the video, and then we actually got into factor 1 and we all talked and did our on-the-spot consensus on factor 1 after factor 2.
Now I see that, in between the factors, you had only one vendor that took the advice, because I think you only advised the one vendor. Well, were they kind of a known vendor, or were they a new entrant into this environment?
Correct. So we had 4 submissions for phase 1, and we advised one company not to proceed to phase 2. They were a new vendor. From what we could gather, they weren't tied to the incumbent contractor or any subs that were involved with the incumbent contractor. So, we were able to just we didn't have any information about them other than their submission for phase 1.
I'll say, well, I can't wait to conduct those interviews and learn a little bit more about this company from this procurement. So now we're in phase 2. I see you did some oral presentations, so let's gen that up.
Yes, sir. So what we did is, this is all very heavily related to disasters and regions. So what the program office did was they came up with a scenario-based question. And what they did then was once they presented the scenario to them on the spot during the presentation, we gave them 3 hours to recess and come up with their actual response to the scenario. We allowed them to use computers and the internet and stuff like that. However, we did not allow them to reach back to other employees from their actual company.
Outstanding. Now, can you tell us a little bit about what you saw during the oral presentations?
So once we actually got into the oral presentations after the 3 hours, we allowed them to present their scenario to us and then also ask on-the-spot questions. By doing this, 2 of the 3 companies really shined and stood out. You could just really tell that they had previous experience in doing this type of work. We just, we thought it was very beneficial to do this because that way we weren't relying on just a written submission, and then you never know if someone's actually submitting a ghostwriter submission that was done by a bigger prime. So, this definitely put a lot of people at ease and actually seeing the real people that were going to be involved presenting the information.
Outstanding. Now, kind of shifting a little bit into the team-based approach. Now, like we said before, IPTs, we have, the CO, you, program office, and the procurement attorney. We touched on you, but can you tell us a little bit about your program office and attorney support from the beginning? Was everybody on board and comfortable?
Yeah, from the get-go, the program office was 100% on board. Luckily, I was fortunate enough to have our section's portfolio manager, Spencer Sams. He stayed on board the whole time. He was always on the biweekly PIL calls, always willing to meet with Amanda and I. He actually sat in on both phases of the actual procurement. He volunteered to be our note taker and ensure that everything was going great. It was very helpful to have Spencer be there, just to make sure that we were on track and doing everything that he had experienced with other PIL projects. Amanda and I were all in on the PIL process as soon as we became comfortable with it after reading the workbook. But however, we did find that wasn't quite the case whenever the requirement got into further reviews up the management chain.
Yes, you hold up the management chain. So did anything kind of help make them comfortable throughout the process?
I would say, keeping them abreast of the information often and early. We actually were very fortunate to have our legal representative actually sit in on both phases. So with her being there, she was able to feel comfortable about what we were doing. I just really can't imagine that if we left her out of both of the phases and then we just submitted a paper document to her after the fact, she's reading over this. I just don't know how effective or how successful we would have been. So having her sit in on both phases was definitely great. And she actually attended all the PIL biweekly phone calls.
That's right. Now you touched on documentation, and we had a question from the chat pod. How did you document your on-the-spot consensus?
Spencer actually wound up being the coordinator for that. So we actually used Microsoft Teams, and we actually had an embedded working document. So everyone was all in teams together, and we were able to all input our information live under each aspect of the on-the-spot consensus. So, when we were looking at the factor one, they were typing in like, oh, radio script, these are what I liked, this is what I didn't like, this increased my confidence. We were using the confidence ratings. However, being in the FAR part 8, we just said this increased our confidence, this decreased our confidence. We didn't stray into the FAR 15 of, strength, weakness, definite weakness. So just having that live interactive document was very helpful, where we were able to then put our notes together and then all talk about it live. And then we modify the document as we went along.
That's right. Such a more streamlined and iterative process than we might all have been used to earlier on in our careers of creating a bunch of documents and trying to meld them into one document. Oh, I don't wish to revisit that process again.
Yeah.
You probably either.
No,
Now,
I do not.
A big part of the reason we're here is to talk about, the culture at our agencies. So we can look at these stories and how they drive the culture. So, what do you think of the culture at FEMA in regard to some of these techniques?
After we actually went through this whole process, we've come to realize that FEMA as a whole is very receptive. However, we have seen some pockets within FEMA that are not very receptive to the PIL techniques.
Yes. And it's innovation is voluntary and the whole system is voluntary. So we never want to force that on anybody who doesn't want to be part of the team. So really good lessons learned. Now, what have you done to share your story across FEMA?
The first thing on our plate is that Amanda and I are actually going to attend the PIL boot camp next month. What this will allow us to do is we just hired a whole bunch of new people in the mitigation section. So once we go through the actual boot camp, we're going to sit down with them and actually bring them up to speed about the PIL techniques. And it's also my goal is to actually reach out to the portfolio side of the house, reach out to Ryan and Spencer. They hold a lot of brown bag sessions. So it'd be great to actually, sit in with them on their next PIL brown bag session and kind of offer up my story and what I've seen. And then also I can also provide them with a list of potential attendees, that way that they can reach the right audience for that brown bag session.
Outstanding. Now we're going to shift to the next slide. And basically what we have here is just a sample of our submission form. So in order to work with the PIL and DHS, we asked for a one-page document. That's the only thing we asked for. Here was the one-page document that was submitted before Chance came along. As you can see, the procurement lead is not Chance Keone. It was somebody else on the form. And this is how our teams within DHS work with us. Voluntary submission, you submit the one-page document, and then we will work with you. So let's go on to the next slide for lessons learned. Now, you must have learned a lot from your experience. What could you share first regarding any of the techniques?
Amanda and I greatly love the scenario-based oral presentation. We found it to be very helpful. Obviously, as I spoke earlier, we talked about the potential risk of prime contractors going out and subbing out a different contractor to actually write the proposal for them. You never know when you get a written submission if it's actually done by the contractor that you want to hire or if they actually farmed it out to someone else. So this is very important to us that we actually get that comfortability and, you know, great ease of mind of speaking directly to the people that are going to be involved. We felt that it was a lot more fluid and on the spot. And it showed us, you know, with on the spot questions also embedded into that, you know, the company can react to something that's very quick, which in the disaster world, you know, you need to have somebody who's quick on their feet and can react.
Yeah, that's right. It's all about supporting your mission, right? And this was directly what you were trying to do. Now, what do you think you could improve on the next time around?
Obviously, next time around, we just want to be more familiar with all of the different PIL techniques. You know, the first time around, we were not familiar. So that learning curve probably, you know, actually added a little bit of delay. So, you know, with us actually being in the know, we'll be able to improve even more on the PIL process. We've already seen that it's a better process than what we've already been doing. So just imagine how many days we can shave off the already expedited process for this requirement. And just to point out, you know, this wasn't anything on our plate. We're also working simultaneously on another major requirement that also involved the PIL process. That was over $150 million for a single award IDIQ. And that action was actually done using FAR 15.3. So it was very time consuming, and we actually wound up having consensus meetings back to back on the same day.
Right. So a lot on your plate. So obviously one at a time is desirable, but not realistic in FEMA sometimes. And, you know, shout out to Chance, his other procurement, which was the process was very similar to this one, right? Despite it being 15.3, it was very similar, but all protest grounds were denied. And it's actually a neat little case study. So shout out to you. A lot of good lessons learned in that one. So finally, any final things to add before we move on?
Essentially, you know, from this experience, you know, we learned that these innovative procurement techniques are definitely here to stay. It's not a one and done type scenario. We definitely feel that every contracting officer, specialist, and program office person needs to be familiar with these techniques. And it's actually my recommendation that it'd be great if the PIL Bootcamp was actually a required course for all the 1102 series, and especially the cores in the program office. But obviously, even more people in the program office should be involved in that, but definitely make it a requirement for the course at least, because this is definitely going to be a staple in our development, and it needs to be a required source of learning.
All right, powerful words from Chance. Chance, I'd like to thank you for your time. And this wraps up our third and final story for the day. So thank you to David, Emily, and Chance for sharing your honest perspectives with the live audience and future audiences who may watch the recording. We've carved out the final few minutes for you to ask some questions. So we will try to respond to them rapid fire, either in the written format or verbally. If they're specific to one of the presenters, we'll try to get them back up here. And if your content-related question didn't get answered, then please feel free to email us, pil@hq.dhs.gov. If you have a question about credit or something like that, please reach out directly to Ncma and not us. So I'll start. Scott, can we move on to that next slide, please? So I'll start, you know, kind of on our resources page. Some of the questions that were being asked, you know, can I get a sample of this? Can I find Emily's solicitation? You heard Leslie and Soraya bring up the periodic table of acquisition innovations. So there's, you know, a link here to it. It's actually just fai.gov/periodic-table. It's a really easy website to navigate. So you can see our homepage here, the PIL primer training on YouTube, and other quotes from the great Vince Lombardi as well. So Scott, let me actually throw you the first question, all right? Because it's an easy one.
I like the easy ones. We'll start off that.
All right. Have enough procurements using this process been recorded with an assessment of the viability of the awardee to successfully complete the activity within budget and schedule?
That is a great question. And that goes to one of the questions why we call ourselves the Procurement Innovation Lab, because we like to collect data. And so every year, 1 year after the award of a PIL project, we go back and we collect data from that awardee and from that program office to find out, hey, last year you awarded the innovative technique and you thought that the award was good. How's it going 1 year in? And we collect that data. And most times we find that the award is doing very well. Speaking from experience, when I use the PIL techniques, excellent job. Really awesome stuff there.
All right, this next one's quick. When's the next PIL boot camp? Well, if you go into FADIS and look up FCL-A-9053, you can see the list of courses. We do have a smattering coming up in April and May. Most are fully booked, but we did just turn 2 on, and we'll put in the dates of what those 2 are. Some are DHS only, but some do invite the government-wide audience. And we are envisioning a joint government and industry audience coming up in June. So stay tuned for that one. I'll answer this next question, Scott. Do you have any consolidated data on numbers or percentage of vendors choosing to continue to the next phase after receiving the advisory notification that they are unlikely to be successful? So actually, you take that one, Scott.
That's a good one, right? There's this notion that, especially in government, if you advise someone not to proceed, they're going to say, oh, to heck with it, I'm going to go forward anyways, right? But actually, the data says otherwise. Over 99% of the time, as long as you're doing things well, if you advise a vendor not to proceed, the vendor is going to understand that they don't have a competitive edge in that next phase, and they are going to take their business and proposal dollars and spend that somewhere where they do have that chance to win, because that's what the vendors want, right? And there's a couple of rules there. The first rule is that factor 1 has to be the most important factor, and it has to carry forward into the trade-off decision. The second rule is that when you give them the advisory notice, you have to give them enough time to think about it, talk about it with their leadership, and make a decision. So maybe 24 hours isn't long enough, but maybe 48 hours is long enough, or maybe over the weekend. And the last one is, then you have to give them enough time to actually draft their response. If you're expecting something to turn around in 3 days, industry's already working on it before you gave them the advisory notice, right? So you have to give them a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, something like that. And you can do that during responses when you put your draft out.
Right, and we're still tracking, even after 6 years of doing this, close to 99% success rate on folks taking the advice. But hey, when we don't do it correctly, or we're in too much of a rush, everybody doesn't get those same benefits. So we try to be very mindful how we teach and implement these techniques. I got a really good question, Scott. I'm going to take it.
All right.
When should compliance to FAR take precedence over contracting innovation? That's a neat question. So everything we do is within the 4 corners of the FAR, as it's related to FAR-based procurements. So innovation and compliance definitely coexist. They do on all of our procurements. There's nothing we do that are not in compliance with the FAR. 1.1024 specifically calls out the COs must continue to innovate to achieve the efficiencies that go along with it. And we've learned treating everything like it's a 15.3 major DoD weapons system acquisition when it's not is not innovating. That's actually quite the opposite. So that's part of the culture change. So everything we do is compliant within the FAR.
You have to comply with the FAR first.
All right, I think that's maybe the last question. One last one. Someone asked, what are the concerns at FEMA with workforce members who are reluctant to change? One thing we've learned is the last area we need to get to as far as being willing to try new things and being okay if there are failures here and there is that middle management throughout our entire workforce. So you heard Soraya and Leslie, senior leaders want to do it, the workforce on the ground, they want to do it. But a lot of times it's the middle managers who have been stuck doing it for some time. And that's where we're at right now. So that's kind of the last crunch we're trying to get at. But Scott, I think that wraps up our questions, aside from one of our members putting the bootcamp information in the chat pod.
Gentlemen, this has been a fabulous webinar. I can't thank you enough. You guys are great. You should go on the road with this, quit the day jobs, take it on the road.